Hi, this is Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co host Alex Benesch is in Germany. Of course, the crisis created by President Trump in dumping Ukraine, disrespecting the Ukrainian president, and then disrespecting Europe, tariff wars, and such. The appearance, the outward appearance that NATO is breaking up. Even Japan is becoming alarmed. We're going to discuss these and the developing unraveling of the Western alliance. So, Alex, you're in Europe. Did you? What are they saying in Germany now? Are they upset?
Well, I mean, this is Europe, so basically, there's kind of this weird paradoxical relationship. Perceived relationship or perceived view of the United States. So on the one hand, we know the United States stands for security and it stands for order, and they're leading in many areas of trade, and they have this fantastic military and their great naval power and everything. And it's kind of this American sense of responsibility, right? This is something that Europeans usually very much appreciate. But at the same time, you get like this standard left-wing propaganda against the United States. You get some of the truther conspiracy propaganda against the United States. You get the Russian propaganda against the United States. You also get the Muslim propaganda against the United States. Now, the Muslim propaganda is pretty much the same as the traditional conspiracy propaganda. Now, we have, I think, what is it now, 5 to 10% Muslims, something like that in Germany. So that's also a factor. If a couple of million Muslims here in Germany, if they have an opinion about the United States, that's a sizable number of people with an opinion. So it's important what kind of an opinion they have. Is it realistic or not? So there's this appreciation of America, and we love their culture. We love their the sense of order and sense of strength and leadership. But there's also this negative propaganda. So when there's a Democrat in the White House, yes, different people here, they feel more positive, and then if it's a Republican in the White House, then it's different here. So it's always some other group that is happy or not happy. But with the Republican Party, I mean, I think the Republican Party has been extremely consistent. It's almost like they never really change. They have a younger image now. It's a bit more younger and hip and more contemporary, but it's still the same party. And I think with all this talk about first Trump admin, now the second Trump admin, and all the other people in the administration, with all this talk over here, I think there's, in a paradoxical way, there's not just cause for alarm here. There's also kind of a sense of, it's the Republican Party. It's always the same. I mean, the world didn't end with George W. Bush, as some people believed. And, we went through Eisenhower and Nixon, and nobody really cares about...
Maybe the Republic ended with George W. Bush. That's possible.
People don't even remember the trivial reason that that caused Nixon's political downfall. People forgive him for that. Nobody cares about this thing that happened. And then you had Reagan. I mean, there's I think still an appreciation for Ronald Reagan. And it just goes on from president to Republican president to Republican president. I mean, people know what they're getting with the party. And so I think that with the Germans, they see the bluster of Trump. They see sort of his character traits, and they think, that's not fancy at all. But they also see the Republican Party. They think that America is still America, and Trump is not forever. Just like Putin. Putin is not forever. He may be dead in a year from his many medical ailments, his many problems. And Trump is not looking too hot as well. I mean, you saw the video maybe a couple of days ago when he was sort of stiff and walking, getting out of this golf cart, and he seems very old. He seemed very old in that Zelensky press conference. And Vance was doing the talking. Vance had to get up to, into his emotions and say, we feel disrespected. And only then, I believe, Trump got warmed up and he started to join in. So Trump is not forever. People here realize that. And Putin is not forever either. So it's always been paradoxical what Europeans think of America. And usually they think, well, Americans are going to do it all and pay for it all. But, I mean, the U.S. is a formidable naval power. I mean, if they deal with the Chinese, we can deal with the Russians. If we militarize, if we politically get our act together. And then, it's just a sharing of the tasks, right? The U.S. does this thing over there, and we do this thing over here. And that's then how it goes. I mean, America can't do it all and pay for it all, right?
Yeah, well, the problem is that the United States has always been misunderstood by Europeans and Asians. The United States was a country that came out of the British colonies. It's on a different continent. It's separated from Europe by oceans. Its early strategic concept was that of Alexander Hamilton, who worked with Washington on it. The idea was we would be our own continent. We would struggle to be united, to keep as much of the continent under our control, manifest destiny. United States, not to disunite it. Washington, in his farewell address, said, "You are one country. This is your heritage. Don't trust anyone who tries to separate you, whether from east to west or north to south." It was so the idea of union and the idea of splendid isolation. We're not going to get involved in Europe's business. This would be our destruction. There's a story that Washington had a vision when he was at Valley Forge about the future of America. And the greatest crisis of America in this vision was that America would be invaded by all these other countries. Maybe Washington interpreted that as us getting involved in Europe and Europe coming back at us. But the fact is that Americans have a provincial mentality, and their institutions are not like the British Empire. We were never an empire. When people talk about the American Empire, even somebody like Patrick Buchanan who talks about the American Empire, it's nonsense. What, Puerto Rico? The Virgin Islands? The United States is not an empire. I mean, we had the Philippines. We coughed it up. We gave it back. It was too much trouble. It caused us to get into a war with Japan. We don't like ruling other people. When General Winfield Scott took Mexico City, and there was this debate in Congress. What do we do with Mexico? We've conquered it. Give it back.
Yeah.
We just want the empty desert, western desert, so we can build railroads to connect California. The Mexicans couldn't really develop all this area, and the Americans had the energy to do it.
Develop Alaska.
The Russians were in California. Actually, they were trying to lay claim all the way down the coast, and so were the British. By the way, the British were at one time laying claim to Oregon, as well as I think the Russians. So you had this competition. You had the Louisiana Purchase with the French, which Jefferson bought it from Napoleon. America built itself up with this concept, but we were, with John Quincy Adams, the greatest Secretary of State in American history, was the Secretary of State of President Monroe. President Madison. President Monroe. I always get those two mixed up. Invented the Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine was basically dependent on the British fleet to enforce it. We don't want other Europeans here, but of course, British were already in Canada. We couldn't do anything about that, but we had the biggest demilitarized border after the War of 1812 with the British Empire in Canada. And it has been the biggest demilitarized border in the world since that time. I can't think of any other. Look at how long that border is. So America, imagine your nearest neighbors are Canada and Mexico. Mexico's not a real threat to you. Canada, you got the biggest demilitarized border in the world. The biggest war you ever fought was the Civil War. You really don't want to get involved in other people's affairs. You have this the newspapers, the war with Spain, which got us into this empire thing, and you've got Teddy Roosevelt, wanting to do this thing, building the Panama Canal and whatnot. Well, that those adventures were sort of contrary to our nature. Teddy Roosevelt pushed us in a way. It was all these countries had empires, and why don't we have colonies? It's like monkey see, monkey do. And of course, World War One kind of, Europe got trashed in World War One. World War One was the event that started to break apart the great civilization of Europe. Aristocracy gave way to Bolshevism and democracy, socialism. You had the Weimar Republic. You had the rise of the Nazis. Everything was coming apart. But in America, it's like, stay away from us. We don't want any. I mean, we got involved in World War One and we saw it as a mistake. We didn't want to be in the League of Nations even. We didn't join it. Woodrow Wilson, the famous book, When the Cheering Stopped, people stopped cheering for him. It's like, no, this is enough. We don't want it. Americans have their own world. North America is a world that is American. And the rest of the world, it really has never affected us much.
Oh, and by the
we
way,
don't really care. And that's so deep in our bones.
Just to interject real quickly, this is a point I made on X or Twitter. I mean, what did the British basically say when the Americans declared independence? Well, what was said was, you're not a real country. You're just our colonies. You're not a real country. You don't have your own identity. You're just anarchist rebels, and we own you, right? And this is exactly what the Russians said to the Ukrainians. You're not a real country. You belong to us. You don't have your own identity, right? This is kind of the parallel.
See, the thing is, Thomas Carlyle made this point about the United States and about other countries in the middle of the 19th century. Carlyle said that you can draw a border around a place and you can call it a country, but it takes a long time for a country to form, or it takes traumatic events for it to form. And he made the statement, and this was before the American Civil War, he said, America is not fully formed as a country. And he said and he was looking at British history when he said this. Look at Britain. You've got Wales, you've got the Scots in the north, you've got Ireland, you've got, Britain is there's all kinds of different parts of Britain. People speak different accents in different parts of England, let alone Great Britain and the Scots in the north. It's a complicated thing to become a country. And so he said, America's not a country yet. But I think it did, the Civil War and a lot of things that followed it, all the scarring tissue, America became a kind of country, but it became its own self-misunderstanding. Henry Adams wrote about his dismay at the war with Spain, that America had left the policies of Washington and Alexander Hamilton. And of course, he was an Adams, and the Adamses were Federalists. The Federalist Party died after John Adams. There were no more. They became the Whig Party and then the Republican Party. But he basically said this is a disaster because we're not intellectually suited to being we're inward-looking people. And World War II changed that because the British Empire collapsed. We got behind the United Nations. We became the guarantor as the British faded away of the freedom of the seas, which the British Navy had assured. Many of the principles of the British Empire, the United States was to fulfill. We got behind NATO to stop the expansion of Stalin. We also began to stop communism in Asia. We fought the Korean War, the Vietnam War. So, but these things became very controversial for Americans when it came to Vietnam. I mean, we lost more than 50,000 dead in Korea and more than 50,000 dead in Vietnam. That's 100,000 dead. America lost under 500,000 dead in World War II. We were one of the countries least affected by the human carnage of the major powers. The Russians were the most affected of any country by the carnage of that war. The Russian psychology was scarred in a different way than ours. and their leaders were ruthless psychopaths. If you take the testimony of Colonel Stanislav Lunev, my GRU defector friend, but the United States didn't suffer that scarring. I think the only attack on the United States, there was some Japanese planes launched from Japanese I-boats, flew over Oregon, dropped some bombs. There was anti-aircraft fire there. There was a Japanese submarine that surfaced and attacked some oil storage tanks off Santa Barbara. I think maybe a security guard was killed or wounded, maybe. These little details. I mean, so that's it. We had U-boats on the Gulf Coast sinking freighters off the coast. You could, at the beginning of the war, it was Operation Drumbeat. You know, you're German, you probably heard about it. It was the German submarines were unleashed right on the American shores. You could see oil tankers going down. There were oil slicks. There were power outages on the East Coast because of the oil tankers being sunk. Of course, that was just a phase in the war. Germans couldn't sustain that kind of an attack on the United States coastal areas. That's all we suffered. In Russia, they suffered the siege of Leningrad, where, a third of the population died. They lost, the Russians lost 27 million. Well,
that's why Putin
John
hates
Mosier
us,
speculates
hates us
it might
Germans.
be 35 million, you know?
Yeah, that's why Putin hates us Germans in particular.
He's a Leningrader. Yeah, the most virulent people that came in this circle around KGB General Dmitry Mironov to form this strategy to destroy the United States in the 1950s were Leningraders. And you will notice that the next generation of those that carried out the long-range Soviet strategy, Vladimir Putin, Sergei Stepashin, Dmitry Medvedev, all these leaders, they're all Leningraders.
Yeah, and the Russians the Russians nowadays, they also call Americans Nazis because, they say that Americans are from the same breed basically as Germans and Brits, so we're all the same. We all look kind of the same, and we're all Nazis to them. That's kind of that's kind of the oversimplification that's happening here. And now you mentioned the old system in Germany, right? You had a Kaiser, you had like an emperor. Everybody knew the guy's name, and everybody knew he was in charge. And this kind of and this made it easier for people to have because usually humans are, humans developed in very small tribes thousands of or tens of thousands of years ago. But when you have larger societies and in like a German empire, it gets confusing to people, and having this guy, this Kaiser, and this personality cult that made it a lot easier to get that feeling or that sense in the population of follow this guy and that's the end of it. And that became a problem obviously later, as you said, when there were these new political movements like National Socialism or this weird mixture of things. And then we had a highly pathological leader who created an even bigger personality cult, like this expression of his fantasy, right? Adolf Hitler believed very early on that he was chosen, that the entities were speaking to him and they had plans for him and he could do these grandiose things. There's testimony from his very few friends, let's call him that, in his early days. And whenever a young Adolf Hitler would, watch the Wagner music, live, he would watch the theatrics and listen to the music. It was always described as Hitler being in a different state of mind. This was a religious experience to him. He felt chosen, and even in World War I. Hitler believed that the entities protected him. He thought he was hearing some sort of voice, or he was getting a suggestion from the entities, okay, move over there in the trench. And so he at least claims he followed that instruction from the entities. He moved over in the trench, and then where he stood before, an enemy artillery shell, I think, hit, and he would have
Yeah.
died. But he listened to the entities, and so his fantasy became even more grandiose. And
Well, it was Carl Jung who partly put together the, we find out later, the OSS's psychological profile on Hitler, who initially described Hitler as a shaman, right? So a shaman talks to entities, and the idea of this shamanistic thing about Hitler, he would go to his retreat in the mountains and he would commune with the gods. Maybe, you know, Olympus is
yeah.
up on a mountain, and he would come down with his decisions. And of course, people think of Hitler as decisive and coming up with quick decisions. He wasn't. He was a procrastinator. He made decisions under pressure when he had to. He didn't like to make choices. He had a strange nature in that way, but he did those things. Yeah, he was
Oh, by the
shamanistic.
way, and just so people understand the context of what you just explained, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
outwardly, Bavaria, especially, which was like the long time home of Hitler, and his favorite place to be in the Alps in Austria, and Austria and Bavaria. There was always a lot of esoteric and occult activity in Bavaria and Austria. I mean, outwardly, it's very Christian, very conservative, very neat and tidy, but there's always this vast activity in that way. So he was not unique in that way, but the amount of this, what he did, and how far he took it, that was certainly unique.
Yeah, well, the thing is that what were these entities that Hitler was channeling? What were they telling him to do? If he was channeling something, and this is the thing. Look, I wrote this piece called "The Gangster We Are All Waiting For" about Trump. I don't. I'm not saying that Trump is Hitler. Trump is Trump, but I think that there is, when you look at Hitler and the Germans by Eric Voegelin, he discusses why did the Germans follow Hitler? Why are the MAGA people repeating everything Trump says when he's wrong?
Sure.
You see, why would people follow a leader who does something that's really terribly wrong? Whether it's mass murdering people or whether it's saying things that are wrong and causing a nation like Ukraine to be destroyed. I mean, look, libertarians will argue the United States doesn't have an obligation to save Ukraine.
Oh, come on.
Well, hold on. Technically, we don't have an obligation as a country. This is American psychology now. America is this isolated. Europe is over there. We're here. We're responsible for ourselves. You guys are responsible for you. So there's this idea. This in America first kind of comes back to the America first idea in the 1930s. We're going to stay out of the war. We're going to look after ourselves. Well, that idea is fine until you do end up taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Once you start taking responsibility, it's like you adopt a child, right?
Yeah, and it's like
if you adopt a child, you can't just throw him out with the trash once you've adopted him.
And also, it's
right?
like this. It's like this thing when Americans have this mentality of, we want to be number one, not just for petty reasons, not just to be number one and call ourselves number one, but to take on that responsibility. You can see that in the military. You can see that in business.
America first doesn't mean America being number one, though people take it. America first means that we think of ourselves first. It's sort of a selfishness movement for America.
Yeah,
and,
but it's also
course,
it's like the sacrifices. Yeah. If an American joins the military, or an American gets drafted, but there's a lot of sacrifice too. I mean, you're not just doing it for yourself individually.
All countries have soldiers that are making this commitment, but the thing is that once Pearl Harbor happened, once America was attacked by Japan, once Adolf Hitler a few days later declared war on America, despite not wanting to be in a war. Because in World War I, we kind of declared war on Germany. I mean, we had our reasons, the U-boat war, the Zimmerman telegraph, things of this nature, unrestricted submarine warfare. We probably should have stayed out, I think, of World War I. we messed with the natural balance there, but we did. But we went back into our isolation. We said, no, it was a mistake. Americans sort of collectively acknowledged World War I involvement was a mistake. You go back to 1927, what would most Americans say? No, we didn't like it, and we don't want to do it again. But the rise of fascism, the rise of Hitler, the war, which began in 1939 in Asia, it began in 1937. Americans were very shocked at the Japanese invasion of China. They had looked the other way with the invasion of Manchuria, but with China, it was like, this is getting bad. So in 1937, Americans start having this discussion. What is our role here? And of course, it was like, well, we're still going to stay out. But then Pearl Harbor happens. And, people want to say, Japan was baited and there was Operation Snow. The Soviets, had their operatives in Washington to help provoke the Japanese. Whatever that is, the Japanese attacked the United States.
True.
It doesn't matter why. They attacked us, and they attacked us first. They bombed our fleet. They sank our battleship. They killed nearly 3,000 guys. They bombed us in the Philippines. They trapped an army. They wiped out an American army in the Philippines. They death marched the army. They committed atrocities on our soldiers and POWs and civilians as well. No, we were very put out with that. And then for Hitler to declare war on us, strategically, it made sense for us to help the Russians and the British, who were already fighting the Germans. And of course, for people who want to criticize that war, look, we were pretty angry. And everybody in this country knew. Hitler, the Japanese, they thought, the Americans, they're these isolated, they're selfish people. They're not going to sacrifice in a war. They're not. These people are just about their own comfort.
Yeah, but
these Americans are, they're Epicurean.
If people out there made and still make strange arguments about that, I mean, just imagine the scenario. The Nazis, just that mental experiment here, that hypothetically, the Nazis take over Europe. They have a lasting deal with the Soviets, then they coordinate with the Japanese, and then they start attacking the US. I mean, eventually this problem is going to reach the United States soil. And now we live in a world where intercontinental ballistic missiles can travel thousands and thousands of miles.
Thanks to the Germans and to the U.S. atomic bomb project, we had nuclear cap missiles. But to get back to this thing about America, the psychology of the country, Goebbels, if you read his letters, he was even making fun of the Americans after U.S. Second Corps was badly hurt by Rommel at the Battle of Kasserine Pass. It was our first battle with the Germans, and we lost. Rommel beat us, right? It was
because
you
knew the territory, and sure.
No, not really, because it was new territory because it was in Tunisia. Rommel hadn't been fighting there, but it was the U.S. commander of Second Corps was a drunk, basically. The guy they put in charge of this first fighting formation that invaded North Africa was a drunk.
Yeah, but Rommel liked to use the advantage of flying over the future potential battlefield and having local sources and studying old documents that the United States didn't have and studying the conditions of that potential battlefield. So Rommel was always super prepared. And of course, if there's American troops coming in, they don't have the same advantage.
Well, Kasserine Pass, Rommel was retreating from the British. The Americans were behind him, coming from West Africa, and Montgomery's Eighth Army was following him. So he was fighting retreat, and then he just turned on the Americans and hit the Second Corps in this lightning strike. And the Second Corps, Americans had never fought a battle against the Germans in World War II till then. That was the first one. And they got hurt. But anyway, my point in telling this is there were some prisoners from that. And I guess Goebbels, the propaganda minister of the Third Reich, sent some people down to see these American prisoners and to do some psychological testing on them to find out, why are you fighting? What are you doing here? And of course, you can imagine some American POWs like afraid to say what he really thinks. These are Nazis. These are different people.
Weirdos.
And he said, these people, they have no ideological commitment, right? Because Americans are non-ideological. They can't, they don't, Americans don't articulate political ideas very well. We have some very simple ideas. Democrat and Republican parties back in those days weren't that much different. Roosevelt started to make them different. But a lot of American politics, it went back to the Civil War, and it was a different whole scene. So these Germans looked at these Americans and said, these people are a joke. They're never going to. So what did Goebbels tell Hitler? It was the Americans are a joke. They're not going to be a factor in this war. What a big mistake. The Americans, nobody realized American industrial potential, American willpower. We built more tanks than all the other countries in the world put together in World War II. We built more aircraft, military aircraft, than all the countries in the world put together.
Without destroying
the
American economy, by the way.
Right. We went into debt, but the debt we went into in World War II is about the same as the debt we have now.
Yeah.
Right? In peacetime.
Yeah, but what an achievement. What an achievement. Not just achieving that level of production, but not completely destroying your own economy. And then America could even convert the economy back to civilian without shredding everything, which is something that the Russians can't do. So, I mean, we Germans,
So people didn't understand. Nobody understood the power of America. America didn't understand it. And all of a sudden, and America tried with the UN. All right, we handed over to the UN, and we kept our troops in Europe because the Russians kept theirs. And we had the Far East situation. We had occupied Japan. So, and then all of a sudden, we noticed Stalin's breaking his word. And it was Harry Truman says to Molotov, the foreign minister of Stalin, he says, "Your boss is a liar." And that really was, that was it. They weren't going to be buddies anymore, Truman and Stalin, despite their meeting at Potsdam and all the other friendly gestures between the two countries. It just wasn't working because Stalin had ambitions. Stalin was a communist. Stalin had infiltrated the Roosevelt and Truman administration with spies. Truman appointed Harry Dexter White the Secretary of the Treasury. It turned out Harry Dexter White was a longtime Soviet agent.
Yeah.
He had a heart attack suddenly, so no one could talk to him, and their investigation ended. But there were so many revelations, and America wasn't used to any of this. This was all new to us. And H.L. Mencken, the great wit and writer of the 1920s and 30s and early 40s, he had always called American politics a clown show. It was a boobocracy, he called it. It was a country of boobs. Democracy is the system where the people get what they want and they get it good and hard. Very famous he sort of ended his book on democracy that way. And of course, Mencken he was poking fun all the time at everything. He was a bit of a humorist. He was the guy that said that Los Angeles is a suburb in search of a city. Lots of witty things that he would say. But when it came to these revelations and the way the country went through World War II and the Soviet influence and the way we mismanaged things and the fall of China to the communists, he got scared. He thought the clown show wasn't so funny anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that when we get to Trump and the American look, I've always thought that the left was dangerous in the United States because they had these socialist ideas. There was a lot of anti-Americanism things. They didn't like capitalism. They don't really like freedom of speech. I worked with them at the university. They were dominant there. One good thing you can say about them is that a lot of them do read, and they do have a thought process.
Yeah,
I think it's twisted, but they're dangerous. But what this group of MAGA leaders we have now is, they're dangerous in a completely different sense because they don't read, they don't know anything.
Well,
they're complete clowns.
We did this episode on Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, right? And Tim Walz, he went through this Democrat training program type thingy, and I looked at the documentation for that or training program, and it basically said that the voters are idiots. You can't tell them anything that's even remotely smart. You can't really talk about reality. Can't just if you say anything slightly intelligent, you're gonna lose their attention, and sooner or later you're gonna be talking to yourself. That's why they say you have to give these personal anecdotes and bring in emotions and talk in very simple terms, blah 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 blah. So I mean, when I saw that, I mean, that sounded really creepy. I mean, even especially for me as a German, because that's what other dictatorships thought of the population as well. And I mean, the Nazis, they had kind of the same idea, the same concept, the Nazis actively trashed the idea of reading and did book burnings, and if you were an intellectual, you were just scum. And the ideal Nazi for the Nazi leadership was just a simple-minded little cog warrior or worker, and just believing in this one mythical creature, Adolf Hitler, and that's the end of it. And just... your mic is muted.
That's beautiful what you just said, because Eric Voegelin in Hitler and the Germans, he says, the Nazi regime was not a tragedy. The Nazi regime was a farce, and the Nazis were clowns. So it's very interesting. I talk about the American political clown. You're describing the Nazi clown. I mean, you really are describing a farce. You're describing clowns.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's like,
and there's something clownish about them. I mean, you've got the clubfoot Goebbels, the Goering who will answer his door. According to Walter Schellenberg, he answered his door dressed as a Roman senator of his house.
And when people made when people in art, in movies, for example, when they later made fun of the Nazis in a constructive way, not just taken very seriously, but still making fun of the Nazis, describing that clown show, it was almost impossible for these filmmakers to make a satire, or an even bigger satire, of the Nazis, because they were so over the top anyway. Remember the movie, the Stanley Kubrick film with the bomb? What was it called? Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove and How I Learned to Love the Bomb. And the Americans, they have this character, this former Nazi, Dr. Strangelove, and he's in a wheelchair, and he can't control his right arm, always has to stop himself making the Nazi salute.
He has a mechanical right arm that keeps going up in a Nazi salute.
And he has to stop his own arm from making the Nazi salute, and he talks in this German accent, and he's so over the top. But this character, this movie character, is not so different from, some of these super weird Germans. I mean, they're
really basing that on Edward Teller, who was a Hungarian and who was the father of the American H-bomb. I think that's what they were doing. And Stanley Kubrick, that's a very left-wing movie full of all kinds of left-wing cliches about the American military. I mean, it's a funny movie, but it's really quite vicious. And comes from the left-wing clown show. You see, the left they're not clowns exactly in the same way, because the left know what they're doing to a certain extent. And but the Nazis, you can argue that they were, what comes to my mind when I think Nazi, I think crazy Nazi, right? There's something unhinged, right, about the Nazis.
And it's something animal-like, too. I mean, when I see this in the last 10 to 15 years, when the Russian propaganda became more dominant here in in ultra-right-wing circles, when the MAGA thing influenced the German right-wing circles, it became a situation where people online, they copy sentences, they copy these little talking points. There's never an original thought from these people, not one original thought. They copy something. It's almost like a magic formula. They say the magic formula, waiting for it to take its magical effect. And when they encounter some resistance, intellectual resistance, somebody's challenging their ideas, somebody's refusing their ideas, it just agitates them so much. It's just like they react with almost pure emotion and keep repeating these talking points. And then it turns very quickly. It turns to veiled threats and real threats, and it's just like one step below physical violence. It's like we just want to smash anything. We just want to smash things, right? We just want to
violent clowns.
Set things on fire. The doors of the loony bin have been opened, and these crazies are flooding out, and they want to create some hell. And
that's what you find on the extreme right and left.
So,
right?
But when the United States intelligence community, very early on, the 30s and then even the 40s, when the U.S. intelligence community, when they did this psychological assessment of Hitler, well, I did more than one, of course, but when I read them, this was like a super accurate description of a narcissistic personality disorder, full-blown disorder, without calling it that, because I don't think it had that name. It didn't have that name even back then, but the description was super accurate, and this was decades before this pathology was listed in the public medical handbooks. So we have, and one of the guys who did an assessment of Hitler, or was overseeing an assessment of Hitler, I think it was this Harvard guy, this Murray guy, I think was his name. He's the same guy who had some dealings with this Kaczynski, who later turned out to be the Unabomber. So you had all this expertise, you had all this knowledge about pathologies, and they knew what Hitler was, and they collected all this information about him. So how then did we end up in a situation where within months, in 2015, 16, within a few months, we had a full-blown Donald Trump cult from 0 to 100. He was the savior. He was the messiah. He's going to arrest all the Democrats. He's going to bring us the promised land. And it was all follow the leader, so fast. And he became the candidate for the election in 2016. Even though the Republicans and the intelligence community, they have all the science, they have all the knowledge, and they know how dangerous pathologies are. I mean, so the Brits, they had this study done. How much psychopathic does leadership have to be? Because they have to make the tough choices, and you can't be a wimp, blah, blah, blah. But we need to understand, of course, the effect of pathology for thousands of years of different empires. I mean, there's some interesting animated graphics on YouTube. You have a map of Europe or some other place, and you see like in a time, over time, you see how these empires formed and disappeared and grew and shrank and blah, blah, blah. They came and went. And a large reason for the decline of empires, the destruction of empires, a large reason was pathology. Because if these leaders are clowns, if these leaders are insane, and they like certain emperors, like some emperors of Rome, if they're that crazy, it endangers the whole system, right? It's like,
well, the point that Voegelin makes is that that you have three types of people, and I've said this on other shows. You have people who can think, and they can see reality and give advice. There's people that can't really think, but they can intuitively recognize people who can, and they listen to them. Okay, those are the useful men. And then there's the useless men who can't think and always listen to the wrong advice, or don't listen at all. And but this is a spiritual thing, because what Hesiod and Aristotle say is that there's sort of a divine voice, right? The opposite of Hitler's voices that are telling him to do bad things, right? It's like you come up to the person at the window and you go, I hear voices telling me to do bad things, right? You call security right away.
Yeah.
But Hitler was hearing the bad voices, right? But there are, there is the divine, there is divine inspiration, there is prayer, there is belief in God, there is people who are inspired to be good, to do good. But in this whole mix of madness, when you talk about narcissistic personality in Hitler, which is what Sam Vaknin says Trump is narcissistic, technically a narcissist is a person who lives in a false reality.
Oh yeah.
That is, he doesn't see reality the way it is. If you've ever known a narcissist, and he will tell you that the things that you will go, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
This is not real, and it's a second reality that he's talking about, and of course, this is what this is part of the book. And of course, a lot of what Voegelin is dedicated to is talking about people who live in a false reality. He calls it a second reality. First reality is the reality we all can see and touch, right? Second reality is something that we create. Well, how do we create it? We create it by falsifying language. And he criticizes Heidegger because Heidegger claimed that all language is a false reality. But those of us who
It's imperfect.
who realize that we can use words precisely to describe what is. We all make mistakes, but we're all trying to describe what is real, right? Well, there's language can become a false set of words, a false narrative, right? False narratives is what we would call it. There have been many cases, this is from Eric Voegelin's Hitler and the Germans, there have been many cases of languages becoming independent, that is, independent of reality, in the 20th century. For example, in his lecture on Armin D. Scherisker, Miller van den Broek constructs a reality out of words that is no longer supported by first reality. In other words, he's created a language that has no contact with reality at all. It's a castle in the air. It's completely false. There's nothing real about it. And he says, what followed from this was a highly concentrated imbecility.
Yeah.
That when they took subjects and they subjected people to this language, they became imbeciles. Such highly concentrated imbecility is a specific literary genre in Germany, he says. It can be found in the Gottfried Benn, for example, in the essay Problem der Lyrik and Dorisch Welt. Are you familiar with those at all?
May ring a bell, but it's
yeah.
I mean the thing
and
about
so you can create and one of the things he says is that under Kaiser Wilhelm II, under the Empire, the German language itself became corrupted, and the narratives of the German people were further and further away from reality. And this is why how they got to Hitler. Now, you look at the United States, how disconnected. First of all, the people don't have much education. They read newspapers. They used to read newspapers. Suddenly, they're not reading newspapers. They're watching TV. They're hearing sound blurbs all the time. It's all about the image on the TV. You've got Neil Postman writing Amusing Ourselves to Death. The American mind, it's like the American psyche is like this desert with a howling wind going through it and all these media images. And so the problem is that suddenly you have a crisis, you have people worried something's wrong, and a demagogue could emerge who has this very funny way of speaking, which is it's all about him.
Theatrical.
Right? Which is what Trump is. It's very narcissistic, and it's like, I'm the greatest, I draw the biggest crowds, everything I say is true, I know everything, I can fix everything, I'll end the Ukraine war in 3 days, or it'll be done by the time I'm inaugurated. These exaggerated claims. And people are thrilled to hear somebody making these promises. But notice in his first term, I'll build a wall. Don't worry, I'll build the wall. How much of the wall was built? The border was not secured even under him. It was better. Biden opened it on purpose. That was horrific. But there's the Democrats lie, and it's more studied, and they've got more intellectual gravitas behind their lies and their false reality. But Trump is like a carnival barker, and so this is very much the clown show of lies.
I think there's several things that happen in parallel. Now there's one thing I think is something that was observed by professionals, and it was written about in, I think, Cialdini's book on marketing psychology. I think this is a very widely known book on how does marketing work, how you sell an idea just like you sell a product, right? What are the dirty tricks to sell an idea or a product? And so they talk about this this incident when this marketing psychologist or marketing expert, he was bringing along another expert I think it was an actual psychologist too. And so these two experts, they go to an event, which is some sort of esoteric claptrap cult thing, and a bunch of Americans, they sign up for this introductory event, to get sucked into this cult. And so these two scientists, they go to this event as well, and they sit in the audience and they listen to what's unfolding. And so these people running this event, they make all these promises which are completely unrealistic. If you follow this meditation esoteric program, if you get into our group, you will develop ultimately supernatural powers. You will transcend the boundaries that any normal human being is bound by, blah, blah, blah. And so at the end of this event, of course, they say, does anybody have any questions? And so this one scientist raises his arm, and because he's such a quick thinker, his brain has been working the whole time, and within 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops, he just completely demolishes the entire presentation that had been given. Just in 2-3 minutes, he just unravels the whole thing, just logically, just completely destroys the whole thing. And so an awkward silence was the result, and the event ended. And so then these two scientists, they watch how many people from the audience sign up for this group. And so they found it very strange, and they started to talk to these people that signed up and ask them, what did you think of, my friend here when he said these things at the end? Do you think that he was talking, garbage, or did that make sense to you? And overwhelmingly, these people responded, yeah, I pretty much understood what your colleague was saying, and I pretty much acknowledged that it was logical, but I still want to sign up because it gives me that hope that I can get out of my many problems. And it's just this overwhelming sense of, I want to give it a try, even though it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I think that's
I want to have magical powers, and if there's even a tiny chance, well, that reminds me of a story of a prisoner, somebody who was going to be executed by the leader of Turkey. What do they used to call him?
Sultan.
The Sultan of Turkey was going to execute him. So he had an audience with the Sultan before he was going to be executed. And he said, if you don't execute me, and you give me a year, I can teach a horse to fly. I have this ability. And of course, the Sultan, very curious to see if a horse could be taught to fly, let the guy live another year. So this is, and then somebody said to him, well, what are you doing? He's going to be really angry with you, if in a year you can't teach a horse to fly. And he said, well, the Sultan may be dead by then. I might escape, or, this is the
I get another year out of this. I mean,
I get another year of life.
What's the worst he can do? Kill me?
There's hope.
What's the worst he can do? Kill me?
He's going to, of course. So, the thing is that people realize the credulity of human beings is really astonishing. There is a book, I have it here somewhere, called When Prophecy Fails. And it is a very famous, in the United States, it's a very famous psychological study of this notion of belief. And it's about a cult around a housewife named Mrs. Keach. That's a pseudonym. That wasn't her real name. She was a UFO contactee. She channeled UFO aliens, the way you might channel spirits or whatever. And I forget, it was Alpha from Uranus or whatever. And part of this cult that formed around her, and she actually was in contact with the CIA and interested in what she was channeling. She got messages saying that it was some year in like 1955 or something, I forget what year it was, that the world was going to end, and that all the people who listened to her, if they sold everything they had and they went to this place, they would be rescued. The flying saucers would come and take them. And of course, what was fascinating was that the day came and went. And yeah, there were people who left the cult. but the majority of people stayed, and they created creative explanations for why the prophecy failed, when prophecy
Yeah,
failed.
yeah.
Why the need to believe is so great. And this ability to delude yourself, to live in a second reality, to accept what is palpably untrue and has been proven to be false, is so great that even when it's right in front of you that what you're told has been falsified, you still cling to it as the truth. And this was the thing with the Friday, uh, February 28th meeting between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky, where Vance should have not even spoken because it was a head of state meeting before the press,
Yeah.
in which Vance said, you should not be talking to the press about what you think of Putin. You know, this is disrespectful to this, which is ridiculous. He's a head of state. He's there to, the press is brought into the room. He's not going to say his opinion. He's going to,
Yeah.
in other words, you're muzzled. We can muzzle you. They're treating the president of Ukraine like a lackey. The president joins in. It's a double team. They're calling him disrespectful, unthankful, accusing him of attacking the administration,
Not wanting peace.
accusing him of running a propaganda tour at home, and of, you know, all kinds of other things. It was, and Zelensky didn't make any accusations. He's just defending himself, saying, "No, Mr. President, I'm thankful. No, I'm not being disrespectful. No,
But
Russia
I need
is
some
dangerous.
sort
We
of
will
an
see."
idea. Is there going to be any
Right.
security guarantee? Is this anything
Right.
that's realistic?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
I mean,
But
I made
but anyway, to finish my point, all these MAGA people, all these websites, all these podcasters, they say, "Oh, Zelensky was very rude. He was
Yeah.
very disrespectful."
That's
When
not
in
reality.
fact, they were disrespectful to him. So all these people are so deluded. See, they're living in a second reality. It's very dangerous because politically, we have to have our thinking cap on. We're voters. This is a republic. We're responsible. There's checks and balances. And the thing is if a leader does something wrong, we need to call him on it. Even if it's a leader we like, we have to look. We like you.
Yeah.
Your domestic policy is fabulous. Stop this right now. Don't do this. This is
think-
wrong. And nobody. There's now some Republican senators speaking out, but this is a travesty, and it's a shame, and it shows that MAGA, they're a rabble.
Yeah.
They're horrible.
And I think the other thing that's happening in parallel, the other thing I think is born out of fear. Now, this concerns an individual like Trump, but this also concerns the MAGA movement as a whole. Now, what Trump had in his life, in his career, Trump had many moments to be where he was probably very fearful. His fantasy may come crashing down. His business empire may come crashing down. Bad things would happen. He just makes one serious mistake too many. And always when he was confronted with that fear, and of course narcissists, somebody with a full-blown narcissistic disorder, they have a whole nother, sense of fear, or they have like a whole different relationship with fear.
Narcissists, let me make a point here. Narcissists live in a false reality where, and this is what Wagner says, when they're children, they suffer an injury and they invent an invisible friend who consoles them. And this invisible friend is imagined to be all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, whatever. But what happens is they get older, they merge with this invisible friend. This invisible friend they start to identify with it as their self. It becomes their ego merges with it. Their ego personality, their conscious personality merges with it. So then there's this they're not realizing they're identifying with themselves as God. So narcissism is a religion in which which God is you, this false self you've created,
and
right?
also
which is very delusional.
The constant fear of a narcissist, of his fantasy crashing down, of the gap. I think Sam Wagner calls it something like the reality gap or something. It's this gap between reality and the fantasy, and so.
To keep the fantasy going, you need narcissistic supply. What the narcissist needs is other people to say, "Hey, yeah, you are God.
You're great. Right? You're terrific. You're the best. Yeah, and I give you money and I give you attention. And like the gap has to be managed. If the gap becomes too wide, it comes crashing down, and the narcissist becomes super depressed and catatonic and may be suicidal. And so that's kind of the fear, I think, with somebody like Trump, that it can all come crashing down. And what helped him sort of to get out of these messes, what helped him seemingly was just a continuation of his regular behavior. And he thought, well, it always worked for him, right? I mean, even when nobody was loaning him any more money, he found new money. Deutsche Bank, the German bank, the Deutsche Bank, they gave him some new money, and he could continue. And he got into trouble with 4 bankruptcies, and he got out of that, and this legal trouble and that legal trouble. He always kind of survives with his method. And collectively, there's collective narcissism too. And I think that with some people in the MAGA movement, especially the influencers, some of these dangerous people do really dangerous things. I think with them, there's also a deep-rooted fear that the cult may break down, and what are you left with? Then you're on your own, and you no longer have a career, and you get a normal job. And so there's this fear, and also an understandable fear of we don't want to lose to the Democrats. So if we make a mistake, our group, our leader, whatever, if we make a mistake and we admit to that mistake, if we give a reasonable response, this may cost us power, this may cost us some voters, this may cause more problems, and then the Democrats are going to win. And I think many, or a certain number of MAGA people, they still kind of realize, yes, we're pushing lies here, but we absolutely have to do this because there's no other way. If we don't do this, then we don't survive, we don't come out on top. But that can lead to these fundamental mistakes where no mistake ever gets corrected, especially the big mistakes. There's no mechanism anymore to self-correct and improve. And this is what happened to various empires. This is what happened to the Nazis as well. There was no correction mechanism anymore. I mean, you couldn't get to Hitler anymore unless you went through Martin Bormann first. And he was always pre-preparing Hitler before he was meeting with somebody else. And then after the meeting, Bormann was again talking to Hitler about what just was being said. And so you couldn't get through to the guy, and there was no method for correction.
Well, with Hitler and Goebbels and these people, there's all these lies that they tell about reality, lies about what's real versus what's not. From the lie that the Poles attacked the radio station, before the Germans launched their invasion, all the way to the claim that the Jews controlled everything, right, and had to be eliminated because they were the cause of the defeat in World War I, the stab in the back and all that. Instead of looking at events through the lens of trying to understand them, really. Well, the thing is that is a very corrupt society that will accept leaders who will tell these kind of lies. I think back to when I was a kid in the 60s, listening to, everybody knew Lyndon Johnson was a crook, but in public statements, the president and the senators, they were very careful to try to be truthful as far as they knew. They might omit saying things that were embarrassing, but and there was a tendency to admit mistakes to some extent. They wanted to be careful of their reputations. They wanted to be careful of their credibility, and the news media too. You would turn on Huntley and Brinkley or even Walter Cronkite, and you knew you were hearing, even though Cronkite was kind of a goofy leftist himself, you knew you were hearing facts. But you could actually calculate, okay, why is he telling us these facts, and how is this being twisted? You could actually see that. So a lot of it was factual, and of course the news broadcast lasted a full hour, and then it was only a half hour, and it starts shrinking down to where the news isn't really news anymore, and it's sort of entertainment news, to where we've got on Fox News, we've got these whole hour sets of programs with people like Laura Ingraham, right, and Jesse. And my problem with those two especially is they would make offhand cracks about Zelensky being bad, offhand cracks about Ukraine, being a bad country. And I was very disturbed, and this is going back 2 years, They began assaulting Ukraine, and they were MAGA. And you listen to them now this week after this event, this disgraceful show in the White House, and these two people are saying that Zelensky was awful and he was at fault and the president was right and Vance. And then you see Sean Hannity's interview with Vice President Vance. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it that the interview that Vance is, they sit down and Vance starts laughing about it was great television. It's like, don't you even know that you looked like a complete oaf, a rude, hideous person? Doesn't the vice president understand what he came off like?
Yeah, there were so many answers Vance could have given, so many better answers. You know, you could still get the same points across. You could still, represent the official line or the line of the government, but there were so many better answers.
A false reality. And at the end, the most false thing in his false reality is he says, well, we used to believe in diplomacy in this country. Now, here's a guy who in the worst moment in American diplomatic history talked over a foreign head of state, dressed him down like he was a naughty child, and completely embarrassed the United States in doing it, and made charges and accusations against him in a press conference that's supposed to be for two heads of state, a vice president interrupting, and he makes a call for diplomacy when he just caused a diplomatic train wreck. And by the way, those people, especially British observers that I've heard, think that it was an ambush and it was planned. The Trump and
but it's like
Vance planned that in advance. I mean, I don't know what to think, but when you look at what Trump did, kicking Zelensky out, and then it raises the question: did Trump even want the agreement signed? I don't think he did. I think it's plausible that Trump just wanted an incident to kick Zelensky out so that he could just cut. And what does he do? He cuts off. Now let's talk about what he did. He
intelligence.
Cuts off the intelligence, but he stops. In Poland, it's reported the military supplies from the U.S. that were already ordered by Congress are not being delivered. The intelligence is cut off. That's the guidance for the HIMARS, the technology for being able, and the technology for Ukraine to intercept Russian cruise missiles has been cut off. This means that Ukrainians, as these massive cruise missile attacks are ongoing on Ukraine, dozens, if not hundreds of Ukrainian civilians will die because of Trump's cutoff.
But also guys like Vance, Rubio, and others, I mean, to be fair, even at this current time, they've said some really harsh words about the Russians. You know, this was like Rubio's interviews after the press conference, where Rubio, I think, made some very fair points. I mean, he said explicitly, Russia has no regard for human life. He said it's a meat grinder, and the Russians have more meat, plus the Koreans. He said basically plus the North Koreans, right?
But that's not you see these statements are just more lies. And they're coming out of the mouth of the U.S. Secretary of State. If you say the Russians are brutal and they're awful, and you cut off the Ukrainians, that is hypocrisy. That's absurd. How can you say the Russians are evil and then help the Russians? Because cutting off the Ukrainians of all these things are helping the Russians. And how can you then vote on the side of North Korea and Russia in the UN against Ukraine? I mean, now that was the most disgraceful vote in the history of the U.S. participation in the United Nations, right?
The U.S. can't do it all and pay for it all, right? So if the MAGA movement,
wait a minute, the U.S. can't do it all and pay for it. The U.S. isn't paying for it all. This is another one of Trump's lies.
Sure.
The United States, $70-something billion, of which about 70 billion stayed in the United States because we built arms plants that would be, guess what, good for us too, the infrastructure. Now, by the way, Trump is closing them, which is insane because we need them. The good thing about that is that we were building arms plants we actually needed to sustain our. So doing things, they're cutting plants for building weapons and ordnance for our Air Force, that Air Force operations officers are saying, if you do that, our Air Force won't be able to operate. The United States Air Force won't be able to operate. These are the things Trump is doing. And it's insanity. It's just stupid. It's a clown show. But this thing is helping Russia. All of these things are helping Russia. And all of the rhetoric that Ukraine is awful. I mean, when you call Zelensky a dictator and you don't call Putin a dictator, when you say he must step down, the Russians have wanted a regime change in Ukraine for a long time. Now America wants it. Why? Because Zelensky stood up for his people. He wouldn't flee the country. He defended it. He would lead them in war. He is right now, you think of him, the greatest war leader in the world in the 21st century. He is.
Yeah.
His country survived a Morat attack, and he stood tall and stayed in the capital. That's a great leader. That's a great war leader.
Is bigger. Sorry. I mean, when people get so hyper fixated on Zelensky and oh, he's this and he's that, blah blah blah. There's a bigger government. There's like these really sharp military leaders in Ukraine. Some of the older ones, they even had to train under the Soviet style of warfare, and so they understand how the Russians still operate. And so there's so many sharp minds in Ukraine. It's not just Zelensky. This guy isn't like the only guy who's doing things.
A sharp lie. I didn't say Zelensky is a sharp mind. He's a comedian. Yeah, that requires a certain intelligence, but he's not. He's been learning to be president. Now he's been president 5 years. He's been president of his country longer than Trump has been president in all of his time. But so Zelensky has experience now. But a leader, a president of a country represents his people. He is not the one who does all the planning and thinks up everything. He's got staff for that. He's guiding general policy. He's bringing people together. He's a leader. He's standing up and representing his people. That's what leadership is. My platoon sergeant in the Marines, he said, we don't need commanders. We need leaders. And this is the definition of a leader. The guy that stands up to take the first bullet. That was my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Garza. The guy that stands up to take the first bullet is the leader. Zelensky did that.
I need ammo, not a ride. Yeah, I mean, one of the greatest lines in contemporary history. I need ammo, not a ride. And right. So
and this is a heroic moment. They had teams hunting him. The city was being surrounded. If the Russians had gotten that airfield on the other side of the Dnieper River, they would have surrounded the city and it would have been cut off. If that city was cut off, it was going to fall.
But even Ben Hodges, famous general Ben Hodges, or former general Ben Hodges, who's really on point when it comes to Ukraine and put out some really great books.
He is.
Wasn't he the guy who co-wrote Future War?
I think he did.
Yeah. And this book Future War, it even talked about a big war coming in 2029. This is not crystal ball gazing. This is just a scenario that to explain to people how this can work, how this can develop. And they say basically straight up, we may get hit in 2029 with a new bioweapon. Let's call it COVID-29, not the old COVID, and so this they will hit us. The communists basically will hit us with a bioweapon. It will disable temporarily 10% of our workforce and military force, and then the communist countries will sneak attack and then make serious gains in a short amount of time, and so even Hodges commented on the current events lately, especially the press conference, and he said that this press conference, the way it went down, this could have terrible consequences for Russia, because Europe is now seriously militarizing, and they're throwing around some huge numbers. I mean, huge. There's talks about increase of nuclear weapons here, more nations with nuclear weapons, or collective EU nuclear weapons. In Poland, they want to train every able man give every able man a military training.
That's going to take 5 years.
I know. It's very,
And
very,
the
very
Russians
late.
are already in a full war economy and mobilizing
Yes,
more
exactly.
troops.
But
So
when you talk about
now what is the dynamic? Think about this for a minute. What is the dynamic of this? Russia sees Europe's preparing to build its arms industry and strengthen itself. Russia's already mobilized. Russia's just going to invade Europe. I mean,
well, according
Russia
to
has no choice now,
yeah, I
right?
mean
Russia's going to invade Europe. I mean,
there was a
how do
war
you
game.
stop this?
Well, there was a war game. I think this was an exercise in 2009, 8, 9 roundabout, and the NATO countries were watching this exercise. I mean, especially with satellites and spies and everything. So NATO was observing basically this exercise of the Russians, and they had like a scenario that sounded really serious in that training exercise. And these NATO people afterwards they created this report stating what they could observe and what it means, how good or bad the Russians are. And this report then got leaked to the public. I think this was posted on WikiLeaks of all places, and people know where I stand on WikiLeaks. And so, but the report was kind of interesting, and it said that Russia still had massive problems with the logistics of war, which then became very obvious even many years later in Ukraine. Massive problems with logistics, massive problems with equipment and training and morale and everything under the sun. And so this kind of sounded like older assessments, older NATO war games from the Cold War, where they were running these scenarios and they thought that Russia would probably get stuck with a land war trying to invade Europe. They would get stuck somewhere. They would get stuck, and so then the Russians would resort to nuclear, chemical, and biological. But they don't have that exclusively. Others have that too. And so there's kind of this grand mobilization that's now happening. And interestingly enough, all these leaders, EU, German, French, British, all Poland, everybody is saying, well, it's because of Trump. It's because of that press conference and what Trump said. And this was so horrible. America isn't paying for it all. America isn't handling everything. So now we have to mobilize and we have to, spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions on our military, which I find interesting.
The thing is that once you embark on that path, given what the Russians know and what they are, the Russians have to attack if they want to keep their ill-gotten gains. You got the same kind of situation that Hitler had. He had to attack quickly before other countries mobilized against him. He was racing against other countries, especially the United States, mobilizing their resources. Russia and China are in the same position. China's halfway to a mobilization. Russia is. Now, I'm going to say something shocking. I have two sources now that are saying that a wave of terror has been prepared. I'm not sure I have permission to say from one, but the terrorist chatter out there is indicating some kind of impending terrorist attacks in the United States. I don't know what the situation is in Germany. A source I have on the other side says that, yes, indeed, the terror is coming soon. Now, is it gray terror, the terror that begins in the period before World War III? Could be. I understand there's more than 2,000 jihadis in the United States ready to go.
When it comes to Europe, Germany, for example, my money would be on nuclear terror, because this is a problem that's been going on for almost since the early 90s, which is smuggling of nuclear materials from the East to Western Europe. And when the wall came down, German federal police was not really equipped with this new situation, because they were equipped with for small scale organized crime, this, that, and the other, some drug running. This is what they were dealing with. But now you had these professional KGB guys. Then you had proxies of the KGB, Albanians, and all these professionals who had experience in warfare and intelligence and everything under the sun. And there was more and more reports about the smuggle of nuclear materials. 100 grams here, 200 grams there, a pound here, a pound there. So we're talking highly enriched uranium. We're talking even plutonium. And when you collect that and you have a few pounds, that's even enough for a bomb. But even if you don't make a full bomb out of it, you can still make a dirty bomb out of it, and you could still create this terror, this fear of where is it going to be, where are the terrorists going to hit next, and there may be nuclear blackmail.
Yeah, well, this is what Colonel Stanislav Lunev told me, that before World War III, there would be a nuclear terrorist attack on an American city. And he said, don't believe that it's Arab terrorists. It will be my people. It will be Spetsnaz. Yeah. And I said, well, then what happens? If, okay, you got a terrorist attack on America. He said, in some weeks or months later, I was surprised at that number, the missiles from Russia will come to finish off. And so that indicates to me that these precursor attacks are softening attacks so that the U.S. defenses, the U.S. economy collapses, the U.S. goes into panic, and we're not able to defend ourselves from full-on rocket strikes from Russia and or China.
And in a first stage, smaller terrorist attacks, which we've already been seeing in Germany, some weirdo Muslims probably connected to the Russians, and a bomb that was supposed to be smuggled onto a cargo plane in Germany. All that stuff's happening right now. But this would be like the first stage. You have these smaller attacks and attempted attacks to keep the security apparatus too busy, everything's too busy, and then something bigger happens. And it was kind of the experts 20 years ago, even, or 30 years ago, the experts were saying, we're anticipating nuclear terrorism with these smuggled materials, stuff from old stockpiles of the Soviets or old Soviet reactors, stuff that's not even guarded properly, stuff you can buy in small quantities, piece by piece. And when a nuclear terrorist attack happens here or in the United States, some proxy group, Muslims, left, right wing, whatever, some proxy group may claim ownership of this attack. They may claim responsibility and then make demands. And they say, the United States must not get involved in Ukraine, or Europe must not protect the eastern flank of NATO. If you do that, if you continue to do these things, then the next terror attack will happen soon and maybe bigger. So this is something that I would put my money on, and as of now. And so I mean we're seeing so many events at the same time. I have stories here on the race in the Arctic. The Russians they want to do some big things in the Arctic, and America is watching that. You have the stuff going on in the Pacific with the Chinese, preparations for defense in the Philippines, and there's so many things going on at the same time, and a lot of very important things are so classified and are not talked about in public. And I think I'm trying to factor that in when I'm looking at the Trump admin, when I'm looking at Rubio and Vance and Trump and the others. I'm trying to imagine multiple scenarios here where we don't know in public what threats the Russians are actually making, what demands, true demands, the Russians are making about Ukraine. If we don't get that, we're going to nuke something in Ukraine, or we're going to just use some chemical weapons.
They've made those threats. They've made those threats publicly. They threatened to drop a tsunami bomb it was on Russian
but that
TV.
Was in television. But that was on television. That was
in front of everybody.
Show. But that did not come. Well, Medvedev said it too, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, look, Russian television is under Putin. Everybody knows when Putin closed down all the independent media, nothing is said on Russian TV that is not approved by Putin.
But what we have not seen yet is like a diplomatic ultimatum. Ukraine needs to surrender fully until this date, fulfill our list of demands, or else, or we're going to use every means available.
There's been this or else for 3 years. Let's remind everybody.
Yeah, but we don't have a fixed date. We don't have like before World War I, for example, where another
Well,
country
he's
says,
had more than 30 red lines that we've crossed. So we've had red lines before. A date is just
yeah,
another form of red line. I mean, it doesn't matter. 37 red lines, and we NATO crossed it, and he didn't nuke us.
do we blink or do we not
There's
blink?
because the reality is that the West as a formation is too strong for Russia and China to start a nuclear war when Russia's bogged down in Ukraine. This is something I have to say strategically, and I've said it before, and nobody pays any attention. Russia and China want to destroy the United States. They don't want to destroy Europe. They don't want to destroy Japan, although they will if they have to. They want Japan and Europe neutral, so that the United States is by itself. Then they can destroy the United States when it's all by itself, and they come over the Arctic and the North Pacific. The other countries just sit quietly and shake in their boots. That's what they want. They want Europe to be neutral or on their side, Japan to be neutral or on their side. Now, Japan is a vulnerable country. If Japan holds out, they can attack the U.S. and Japan. That will make it a little more difficult, but they can do that. But they cannot go to war against the United States and invade the United States if Europe is still allied to the United States, because Europe is more GDP, more people than the U.S., and if Europe holds out, Europe, guess what, can send help across the Atlantic to the Americans.
Exactly.
They can't have Europe helping the United States. They can't have it.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about significant European corporations, chemical giants and steel and and machines and anything to do with radar and rockets and precision parts and things of that nature. I mean, a lot of these corporations here, especially the German ones, they have a long history with the United States. I mean, this started even
Not anymore. Not after what Trump just did.
Not so sure.
Did you see what happened to American defense industry stocks? How they crashed after this? Because guess what? Europe's not going to buy any more of our weapons after this, are they? Because they don't trust us anymore.
When it comes to let's say military cargo planes, we're just about to buy American planes because the A400 isn't really up to standards. And there's still so many great American products we can buy, and also we saw an Americanization of the military here in Europe, with the same camo patterns, the same rifle calibers, the same standards with ammunitions and interchangeable systems, and the planes we're gonna buy. I think we already bought the F-35, and there's gonna be more F-35s delivered, and there's so many things we can still buy, but there's other things we can make and use and not just sell to some other country. Now there's this report here. This is from Fox News. This was also in the in other major publications. It says Russia under threat of sanctions from Trump after attack on Ukraine. So fairly recently, somebody from the Trump government said that currently the sanctions against Russia are a 3 out of 10. It's on the scale.
General Kellogg said that.
Yeah. On a scale that goes to 10, we're at a 3 now, and Russia is suffering. So if they just go to a 4 and a 5, that's going to be significant. And we're going to see if anything's coming.
But the Trump administration is making preparations to lift sanctions.
Well,
the thing is, don't pay attention to what they say. Pay attention to what they do.
But if they get a deal, of course that's different. If they get some sort of a deal stall for time, maybe Putin then dies in a year or two. Maybe that's the American intelligence assessment.
It's not going to change what they're demanding. Sure, they want a change of government in Kiev.
But buying time may or may not be the right move. Maybe it is the right move. We will see about that. Then here's a German report. This is from government media, government taxpayer funded media. It talks about the elimination of a debt ceiling. Now, places like Germany, we had these rules in place. There's like a debt ceiling. You cannot have more debt than this. But now anything military is unlimited. And other nations will probably follow that as well. So it's not, the debt limit does not apply to military spending. And there's different things happening at the same time. Now, individual nations are
But it's
massively
irrelevant,
changing.
isn't it?
What?
It's irrelevant. The Germans start spending seriously. The Russians are just going to invade the Baltic states and tell Germany to cut it out, or we're going to come after you. Stop the building. Look at what happened when. Did you see the speech by the president of France this week? Did you watch it?
No, I did not.
President Macron talking about putting a nuclear umbrella. Did you see what Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said about that afterwards?
No, what did he say?
It's like, you better shut up. You better not do that. You better be careful. The Russians are telling him, you're not going to do that. That's a joke. Yeah, now, did you catch that speech from the French Parliament? Did you see that one? This is French Senator Claude Meluret on Trump and European security. I'm going to read this because I think this has created a huge stir in Europe. This is a right of center French senator. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, dear colleagues, Europe is at a critical juncture of its history. The American shield is shirking its responsibility. Ukraine runs the risk of being abandoned and Russia empowered. Washington has become the court of Nero, an incendiary emperor surrounded by enslaved sycophants, and with a catamine-sedated buffoon in charge of the cleansing of public function.
Musk.
It's a tragedy for the free world, but it's foremost a tragedy for the United States. Trump's message is that there is no point being his ally since he will not defend you. He will impose more tariffs on you than on his enemies, and he will threaten to seize your territories while backing the dictatorships that are invading you.
Yeah, but
the king of the deal is demonstrating to us the art of the deal on one's knees. He thinks he can intimidate China by laying flat before Putin. But at the sight of this
what did the French do? The French neglected security.
Accelerated his preparations to invade. Is this not true?
Yeah,
is this French senator not speaking the truth?
But where's the self-criticism? Where is taking responsibility for all the things that the French did wrong for the last 20 years? They neglected security.
He's taking responsibility. He's saying we're at a crisis point. The Americans aren't going to defend us anymore. We got to do something.
Yeah, but the French were supposed to take initiative anyways. I mean, you can't just say.
Well, that's what Macron did this week. He stood up and he said, "France is going to defend Europe."
This French guy is whining about the Americans, but
this isn't whining. This is truth.
French, yeah, but
listen to this. And this is wrong. Never in the history of the United States has its president capitulated before the enemy. Never has a president backed an aggressor against an ally. Never has a president trampled on the U.S. Constitution or issued so many illegal orders or dismissed the judges who could prevent him from doing so, or fired in one sweep the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, or weakened all the checks and balances, or taken control of the social media. This is not liberal abuse. This is the beginning of a confiscation of democracy. Now, he's exaggerating there. He's accusing Trump of things that Trump can't and didn't do, but he's in a panic. This guy is saying it's true. Trump is signaling Europe. You know what he said about Japan on Sunday? You know what Trump said? He said, well, we defend Japan. They could never defend us. That's not a very good deal for us. Can you imagine that?
It had this.
But
these crazy words from Trump and this crazy press conference. It finally changed the paradigm in Europe, and finally this idea is over that we don't have to do anything. We don't have to take responsibility. We don't have to spend the money. We don't have to make these uncomfortable choices. We can just float and we do just trade. You know, we can be all about trade and our daily lives while the Americans take on all that responsibility. I mean, it's just like, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's easy to trash the US government. It's easy now to trash Trump. It's easy to trash the Republican Party, but are these French going to then do the next step and take
well, they have no choice.
Take matters into their own hands.
Listen. They are. This is what it's about. This right of center French senator. We were at war against a dictator, but now we are fighting this dictator backed by a traitor. 8 days ago, when Trump was patting Macron on the back in the White House, the United States was voting with Russia and North Korea against the Europeans. 2 days later, in the Oval Office, the coward draft dodger Trump was lecturing the war hero Zelensky on strategy before dismissing him like a stable boy and ordering him to submit or resign. What to do in view of this treason? Now, here's his thing. The simple answer: confront. But before else, not make a mistake. The defeat of Ukraine will be the defeat of Europe. The Baltic states, Georgia, Moldova are already on the list. Putin's objective is to return to Yalta, where half the continent was conceded to Stalin. The countries of the South are watching the outcome of the conflict before deciding if they should continue to respect Europe or if they are now free to trample it. What Putin wants is the end of the world order put in place by the United States and its allies, and whose first principle is to prohibit the acquisition of territories by force. This idea is the very foundation of the United Nations, where the U.S. nowadays votes for the aggressor and against the victim because Trump's vision coincides with Putin's. A return to the sphere of influence politics, where great powers dictate the fate of smaller countries. To me, Greenland, Panama, and Canada. To you, Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Eastern Europe. And to him, that is China, Taiwan, and the China Sea. In the evening parties of the Mar-a-Lago Gulf oligarchs, they call this diplomatic realism. We are therefore alone. But to say that one cannot resist Putin is erroneous. See, he's saying we're going to stand up to him. Contrary to Kremlin propaganda, Russia is not well. In 3 years, the so-called second army in the world has managed only to nibble crumbs from a country 3 times less populated. Interest rates are at 25%. Currency and gold reserves have collapsed, just as its demography. All of this shows that Russia is facing the abyss. So he says, look, we have to confront Russia. Russia is strong in the moment, but we can do this. And he says, certainly the blow is violent that Trump has delivered, but it has a silver lining. The Europeans are walking out of denial. Yeah. In one day in Munich, they have understood that the survival of Ukraine and the future of Europe are in their own hands, and that they have 3 imperatives. And then he goes through it: accelerate military aid to Ukraine and start the military buildup and so on. This is an 8-minute speech. And it is really, this guy was not known outside of France. And now he's famous, and all of Europe is resonating with this in their minds. And this is healthy for Europe. This is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But what he's saying about America, he's saying, yeah, it's bad for us in Europe, but this is a tragedy for the United States. It is. Because it's isolating us. And we have a clown as a governor here, as a president here. A clown. A dangerous clown. Just like the Third Reich was a farce, this is a farce. MAGA, I was hoping, responsible people. Tulsi Gabbard, I was having hopes that, well, maybe they have a strategy. Maybe she's the perfect girl to ramp up the enemy penetration of the CIA. No, she is the biggest penetration there is. Obviously, this woman is part of this Trump thing to help Russia. It's everything they're doing is helping Russia.
Well, let the MAGAs focus on China and the Pacific. Let them battle the communists in the Pacific. Let them battle China. If they don't want to solve this Ukraine problem, then Europe. Do
you know who Curtis Yarvin is?
Problem. So these MAGAs can put their money where their mouths are.
Yeah, Putin is laughing, and he's upped the demands on Ukraine. There's not going to be peace in Europe. But worse than that, and the problem is that it's going to be a catastrophe. There's going to be millions of people. Trump claims he cares about the beautiful boys. More people are going to die now because of Trump in Europe, in Ukraine and in Europe and in Russia. More people are going to die because of his clownishness. And as far as China goes, this is outlandish. There's a guy named Curtis Yarvin. He's a neo-reactionary. It turns out he's had some kind of influence over the vice president, it seems, and over people connected to the administration. And you know what he says? He says there should be 3 spheres of influence: Russia, China, and America. America in the Western Hemisphere. China gets all that stuff on the other side of the international date line. Russia gets Europe, etc. He actually has been saying this.
Sounds like
now,
a cartel.
This is insane. This is insane.
It sounds like a cartel.
It's insane because America doesn't rule the Western Hemisphere. We're going to invade Canada. We're going to invade Greenland. We're taking back the canal because we can do it by political pressure. But we're not. We can't invade all the American countries. It's ridiculous. It's completely out of the way. We don't invade other countries. That's not our history. We go in and help them when they've got, Marxist revolutions or other problems. But, it's ridiculous. The whole thing is insane. Is that what Trump is thinking? Why does he call Canada the 51st state? Why is he talking about getting Greenland? In the president's speech this week, he ended it with talking about, we're going to get Greenland. It's like, what is he talking about? We need it for our defense. Wait a minute. Why does America need Denmark's an ally. We're building bases there now. Why do we need to own it? Is Trump planning to not be allies with Denmark anymore? Or Europe? You really think the United States, cut off from Europe, can fight China? Europe will turn to China, foolishly, by the way, because voices are already saying this. Europe may turn to China as an ally, and that will make things even worse. The United States could end up completely... What if China, Russia, and Europe all agree America sucks, and they all decide to make their own world order, along with Japan? Then America doesn't even have Canada. Canadians are denouncing the Star-Spangled Banner. They're shouting it down at hockey games. How are we going to... We won't have any allies. The entire world will be against us because of this clown, Trump. This is serious. This is where his policies can lead.
Yeah, but
you see, if it's not war in Europe, then Europe is getting along with Russia and China finally, and not with us. And Japan won't be with us. Who will be with us? Nobody. America on its own, they'll just strangle us.
Here's a story from the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago. It says Germany is thinking of nuclear weapons after Trump's embrace of Putin. I wouldn't call it an embrace yet.
Poland's thinking of nuclear weapons. You heard the Polish Prime Minister. So
it says Friedrich Merz, who is poised to become Germany's next chancellor, and he's always been pro-Anglo. I mean, forever. Right? He's so deeply pro-America. He's the most pro-America guy out there.
Not anymore.
Friedrich Merz, he's saying a few things here and there. Friedrich Merz said Berlin should start talks about expanding the French and British nuclear deterrence to cover Europe, according to an interview the conservative politician did with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung, that's a newspaper. It says...
Do you think Russia's going to let them do that?
It says...
what do you think Russia will say when the Germans announce they're beginning to work on a bomb? What do you think the Russians will say?
Yeah, they'll
declare war on Germany. They'll bomb Berlin.
To fill the security gap, Germany would have 4 options, said Christian Mölling, director of the Europe's Future Program at the Bertelsmann Foundation, a think tank, very influential, by the way, think tank. The Americans maintain their nuclear deterrent, the Europeans take it on, a mix of the two, or you try to compensate conventionally. All of these are risky, he said, referring to non-nuclear military forces. On the conventional side, Merz and his future coalition partners said this week they would exempt military spending from the country's tough fiscal rules, de facto removing any limit on spending and allowing Germany to rapidly accelerate its rearmament. On the nuclear side, researchers and some politicians say Berlin's fastest route to rebuilding a deterrent could be to replicate its arrangement with the US. This could see French nuclear bombers stationed in Germany with the mandate to protect the country, or German pilots flying German planes armed with French nuclear weapons, with Paris holding the key to their use, and so on and so forth. And there's different ways to do this. And the CDU party, the party of Mr. Merz, the CDU has a sister party in Bavaria. It's called the CSU. And the CSU was basically built by the Americans after World War II. And so the very influential Bavarian politician Franz Josef Strauß, he was always a big fan of the idea of having German nuclear weapons with the green light from the US, because Mr. Strauß was also the most pro-United States guy out there. And there's intelligence files from the East and the West suggesting that Mr. Strauß was working for American intelligence even during World War II, not just after World War II. And so that idea has been kicked around for a while, and it's like when different European countries have nuclear weapons, I think it makes the job for Russia that much harder to manage the situation, because it's not just necessarily EU nuclear weapons. The Russians are not just dealing with one entity, the EU with nuclear weapons, but they have to deal with all these different countries, and it just becomes like this strategical diplomatic mess for the Russians, because now the situation...
It's going to take so many years for any European countries. Look, the French haven't even tested their nuclear weapons since 96. It's been almost 30 years since the French have had a nuclear test. Nobody knows if the French nuclear arsenal works. And the Russians have had the opportunity to test weapons in the North Korean program, because those are Russian scientists down there in those underground test chambers in North Korea. So, and the Chinese have done test bombs. Look, Russia and China know whether their weapons work or not. The French don't.
Yeah,
The British nuclear deterrent. The British can't probably even launch a missile from one of their ballistic missile submarines. The British probably don't have a nuclear deterrent, and Germany's going to get one in how many years? 4 years, 5 years? By that time, the Russians are building up along the NATO border now.
Yeah,
they are clearing forests for bunkers. They're putting they're making helicopter pads. They're building barracks. They're training troops. There's Russian and Chinese troops training in Belarus right now. And their exercise, Zapad 2025, is in September. So NATO will be attacked in September, give or take a month. It's coming. And if Ukraine falls between now and then, there's no reason that the Russian military can't move on NATO in general, because the Polish army, 202,000, it's not as big as the Ukrainian army, and it's not veteran like the Ukrainian army is. It won't be able to stop more than 1 million Russian troops, which is what they'll have by then. So it's if Ukraine doesn't hold, Europe is facing a Russian juggernaut coming into your country, coming into Germany.
Yeah, I mean,
and they're not going to get to build a bomb.
There's already talk about, of course, European troops going into Ukraine, with the U.S. slightly behind. They can say they're not on Ukraine's soil.
The U.S. is withdrawing the support that Ukraine needs to stop missiles to launch HIMARS. Ukraine's military capacity right now would just lower it a notch. Right now, already.
Yeah. Well,
Ukrainians are dying.
The Europeans
than would have died if Trump
take charge on this.
Yeah.
The Europeans need to take charge on this, and on the American side, especially conservatives, they have to realize that there's no easy way out button. There's no lever you can pull. There's no words you can say to make the problem go away. It doesn't matter what guy you vote for. There's no what words you say, what talking points you copy. There's no easy way out button. So this problem is there, and it's not going to go away. There were so many organizations in the Cold War, like the Bilderberg Group, Transatlantic, relationship, Council on Foreign Relations, then the mirror organizations in Europe, Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Atlantic Bridge. I think Merz is a member of the Atlantic Bridge. So there was just all this networking. All this networking has been there for decades, generations. And Trump is one guy, and I think there's so many other guys on the American side that are talking to many guys on the European side. And this transatlantic bond is still there. And as I said, if a certain number of conservatives, if in America, if they don't want to deal with this European problem, if they want to deal with these European problems and the Ukraine problem, focus on China, right? Put your money where your mouths are, dear MAGAs. Fight the communist world conspiracy. Take on China in the Pacific and get drafted or volunteer for the armed forces or do something else that's useful for this effort. The U.S. is a formidable naval power. Focus on that end, and Europe can deal with the situation here, and there needs to be transatlantic cooperation, and none of that silliness, none of that. The Europeans are stupid. No, the Americans are stupid. That's not gonna fly. And we can pretty much say at this point that Russia, China, and North Korea, at the very least, are almost like one entity. They have this long-term strategy, and they pretended to hate each other for a while, and North Korea pretended to be its own thing, not liking the Soviets that much and having their own brand of socialism, blah blah blah. It's all a ruse. They don't really dislike each other. They killed everybody. They cleansed everybody who was a problem to this long-term strategy. Killed anybody who was really trying to do something new over there. And so there is no easy way out button. And there's no magic alliance with the Russians. There's no magic, weirdo cartel that's gonna be okay for citizens anywhere. I mean, you mentioned this statement earlier. Oh, shouldn't the United States have this part of the world, and the Chinese have that part of the world, and the Russians have that part of the world? Well, that's a cartel idea, and that sounds
it's a
like
Russian Chinese idea.
And that sounds like complete lunacy.
It is lunacy.
It sounds like complete lunacy, because if you have that if you have that kind of a plan, or you sort of agree with this idea that such a cartel should exist, I mean, how can you trust?
It's dividing the world up into spheres of influence by great powers. That's the idea. And this Curtis Yarvin, who thought of this idea, he's listened to by people in this administration. And I'm worried that Trump is actually thinking this way because of the way he talks about Greenland and Canada and the canal.
Yeah, and
it makes me wonder. He's not concerned with anything in Asia. He's not concerned with anything in Europe. He's talking like he's going to throw Japan to the wolves' nest.
And it's easy for people. It's easy for people who float that cartel idea. It's easy for them to morally justify that concept, even though they don't know how it's going to play out at all.
Morally justify?
Well, they can always make that phony argument to morally justify a cartel by saying, well, a cartel is better than a nuclear world war.
It's not a cartel. It's a division of the world into spheres of influence by great powers.
Well, but it's like mafia groups. It's like mafia groups that say, we shouldn't battle each other. We should just, you take this city, we take that city, you take the other city. Or we take the gambling, you take over the prostitution, you take over the drugs. And so we don't get into each other's hair and we coexist. I mean, that's like what mafia groups do.
You see, the United States does not control South America or Central America. We don't control those countries. We have some relationships there, but generally the Russians and Chinese are all over it. They're all over that region. The Chinese were operating both the ports on either end of the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
Canada's full of Chinese. Half of the added population to Canada over the last 15 years has been Chinese.
And if you float that idea of a cartel, right, and you say it's the Chinese, it's the Russians, it's the Americans, and they own it all, if you float that idea, you may absolutely freak out the Muslims, some Latinos, Africans, because what's going to happen to them, right, when there's a cartel?
What's going to happen to Europe? What's going to happen to Germany and Japan?
Yeah. And so,
by the way, which are a huge, look, the problem Russia and China have in waging a war against the United States is that they don't have enough money. They will run out of money 9 months into the war. They wouldn't have conquered North America. If you think Ukraine is difficult, America is worse.
Yeah.
So but they'll be using nukes and bioweapons on the United States. They're going to try to exterminate us. It will be genocidal. Gloves off. But hold on. What enables them is if Europe and Japan are under them. If Europe and Japan are under them, this stupid camera. If Europe and Japan are under them, then they can suck the money out of Europe and Japan to enable them.
Steal the industry.
So the thing is, this is crucial. Is not defensible.
Yeah.
Is not easily defensible. It's defensible, but it's not easily defensible if Europe and Japan are not with us.
So if you float this idea of a cartel, then the Japanese are going to freak, Europeans are going to freak, Latinos are going to freak out, Muslims are going to freak out, and what are they going to do then? Start something crazy, a last-ditch effort to not end up in this cartel world?
Just be exterminated with a biological attack after the war.
But also, let's say fanatical Muslims, they sense that this is the last chance to ever
Russia and China, without the United States there to look at and for human rights, and without the United States and Europe, the Russians and Chinese can just use biological weaponry to exterminate any racial groups or subgroups they want.
So but then
salt them with bricks or whatever.
Exactly. And so the Muslims, when
no defense against stuff for those people.
When the Muslims realize nobody's going to protect us, the Chinese are going to kill us. I mean, we saw what the Chinese
look at what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghurs. The Muslims in their own country.
Exactly.
It's a genocide.
It's a genocide, and so
worse
the Muslims are going to freak.
The
Muslims are going to freak out, and then the Muslims may do something stupid, improvise a nuclear bomb or use biological weapons against.
Pakistan has a bomb, but they're dependent on China. They'll just be wiped out. They'll just nuke their bomb program. Look, the Muslim world, except for Pakistan, they don't have nuclear weapons. They can't defend themselves against these people, and besides, they control their food supply.
Yeah.
Much of the Arab world gets its food supply from Russia and or Ukraine. If Russia controls Ukraine, they control this food supply that's feeding Egypt, Libya, Syria.
Yeah.
All these countries, these are dry countries. This is a huge patch of desert. Now, Russia will control the world. Russia and China together will control the world. And the United States will be a smoldering desert where the Chinese will repopulate and take over what's left. That's what the future is if this thing goes south on Mr. Trump. That's what Mr. Trump is gambling with right now. That is the problem with what Mr. Trump is doing. I don't want to call him president. It's embarrassing. I voted for him. I'm embarrassed that I voted for him. I'm ashamed that I voted for him.
You voted for the party. Let's put it at that. Because where would we be with a Democrat in the White House right now, right? So
well, I used to think that if we voted for the Democrat, we'd go down faster than if we voted for the Republican. But now I realize there's a Republican that'll take us down faster than lightning.
Well, here's a story from the Japan Times. It says here, less than 3 years ago, Japanese politicians and strategists were walking on air after then Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced that his cabinet had agreed to increase defense spending to 2% of gross domestic product by 2027. Conservatives were delighted. The government was basking in adulation as allies and partners applauded the prospect of a 65% increase in the country's military budget. Now, however, U.S. President Donald Trump is demanding that NATO members devote 5% of their national economy to defense. Well, if we in Europe go to 5%, we outspend the Russians. multiple
And
times
you
every
outspend the
year.
United States too.
Yeah, I mean we would spend. I mean, at 4%, we would spend like what was it? 650 billion a year. That's at 4% roughly. And if we go
Now
at
let me
5%,
say something that I've said before, but I haven't said on this program, and that is that this is the United States defending the world has been a good deal for the United States because guess what? Everybody supports the dollar as the trading currency. Everybody supports it, right? You may if Europe goes to 5% defense spending, what do they need the dollar for or the United States for? They'll be self-sufficient. Trump's policy destroys the dollar. The dollar gets destroyed because there's what, $1 trillion? No, there's trillions of dollars out there in trading currencies, in trade transactions that come flooding back to the United States. What is the dollar going to lose? 70% of its value in a very short period of time? What is that going to do to the United States? It's going to destroy the U.S. economy. No, I don't understand it. It's very damaging to our economy, and it's damaging to Europe's economy, and it's damaging to the defensive structures because Europe can't. Even if this happens, Europe won't be able to defend itself for 4 or 5 years, at least, against Russian nuclear combined arms attack. And Japan, the same thing. Japan is not able to defend itself. The Chinese Air Force is so huge, and their Navy. Japan would be blockaded and forced to surrender rather quickly, especially with the Russians joining in to help the Chinese. So This is insane.
it says here while there are, I mean, so it says basically that the Asians are struggling with the demand to go up to 5% GDP for spending on the military. While there are variations across Europe, typically, proximity to Russia means larger defense budgets. Overall, European defense spending grew 11.7% to reach, okay, it's higher than I thought, to reach 457 billion last year, the 10th consecutive year of expansion. So we're almost at half a trillion, getting close to half a trillion.
The question of nuclear weapons is very decisive in this because, and I've said this until I'm blue in the face, Russians believe that nuclear missile weapons are the decisive weapons of World War III. And those haven't even been used in Ukraine because Ukrainians, they claim, are Russians, and they're just bringing them home. So they can't use them there. But once they go against NATO, they can use those weapons. They can use nuclear weapons. And I believe they will. And they'll use them on the United States. And guess what? We're not able to match the Russians and Chinese in that area. And if Europe's not defended by the American nuclear umbrella, I'm sorry, the British and French nuclear arsenals do not adequately defend Europe from Russia. Russia can take a couple nuclear hits, no problem. But Russia could deliver devastating blows to Europe that would force all those countries to surrender. Unless they stood up to those blows, they might.
It says here, United States threats to withdraw its troops from Asian deployments may well encourage those allies to undertake other self-help efforts. There is already pressure in South Korea to develop a nuclear capability to balance that of the North. I've heard former South Korean officials passionately insist that Washington should support their efforts to do so within the alliance. That argument becomes more compelling when the U.S. is a less credible partner, or seems like a less credible partner.
Well, Trump has made it seem like a less credible partner, thanks to what he's done over the last 2 weeks.
Well.
There's no 3D chess here, Alex. This is bungling on a scale that is hard to wrap your head around. That meeting was you were seeing in real time what Trump is like. We can't make excuses for him. These speeches, these clever things. Oh, he's just bullying people. It's funny. He's doing these funny things. It's a joke. It's really he's getting people to defend themselves. No, this now is rather clear what he's doing. and it's not good.
Yeah, but who's letting
It is.
him do it? I mean, it's the government is
He's the
bigger
president
than
of the United States, and he's surrounded by
Trump.
people. He didn't take anyone into the administration that had prior administration at the senior level in any previous administration. He's taken in all MAGA people, people who appear on Fox TV. That's who he's taken in. Tulsi Gabbard, a colonel in the reserves. I mean, these people to head the U.S. intelligence community, Hegseth, again, I think he was just a colonel. I mean, these people don't have the senior experience at the levels that they're at the jobs they're doing. The thing is you're putting people who are not ready for these jobs in these jobs, and they're very dependent on you. And this is dangerous. You need people who really understand what they're doing in these departments. Now, I've not agreed. He had a lot of those kind of people in his first administration, and some of them are very irritating because I don't agree with the U.S. establishment on a lot of things. But this is crazy. This is not going to work. There's a difference between being responsible and having a responsible policy and having things well thought out and being crack-brained. This is crack-brained stuff. I said it 3 years ago. I was in a meeting and somebody said, "Oh, we got to win over Russia against China." This is more before the war started in Ukraine. And I called him a child. I didn't hold back. Are you a child? This is what you think? This is childish. You cannot determine other people's thinking about who they should ally with. You can't, especially when it's a dictator like Putin. He is joined to China at the hip. They have been. Look at the defector literature. Colonel Stanislav Lunev defected with the information that China and Russia had formed a partnership at the end of the Cold War to destroy the United States. We're seeing that game play out now. And so you're going to win them away from each other? They're on the point of winning because of what Trump is doing.
Yeah, but Trump is not forever. Neither is Putin. I mean, I don't. It's baffling.
To be forever.
How did a casino man, a real estate man, a showbiz man, with no real experience in politics whatsoever, how did he become the candidate for 2016 so fast? And how did this
Marshall McLuhan wrote "The medium is the message," and Neil Postman wrote "Amusing ourselves to death." We're living in a post-literate culture, and in that post-literate culture, it's TV. This guy was a reality TV star. That's how come he became president.
Even the secretive Council for National Policy, even they were struggling with Trump in 2015-16, and there were people in the CNP, the Council for National Policy, who said anybody but Trump. Let's just pick any suitable Republican, anybody but Trump. And there was just very influential people, very connected people, and they said, well, Trump is going to cost us female voters, he's going to cost us young voters, and he's just going to create all this damage that's going to last, and it's going to take a long time to repair the damage. Why should we go with him? And somehow some magic happened, and influential people in the CNP, the Council for National Policy, they somehow got the evangelical leaders to go with Trump and to support him and not criticize him in public. And other influential groups, they suddenly everybody was sort of in line, and they said, okay, it's gonna be Trump. And then it was Trump the president. And within months, you had the Trump cult. It was the Q stuff. It was similar stuff. He's going to arrest all the Democrats. There's this great plan. The storm is coming, and where we go is one. Where we go is one. We go all, or whatever that slogan is. And just within a few months, all these people believed in this fairy tale about a man who his entire life was preoccupied with casinos, real estate, women, and showbiz. I mean, it's like there's something else going on here. I mean, it's like Americans are not like, I mean, in contemporary Americans, they're not like these Germans back then in the 1930s, because the Germans,
Um,
they didn't know what freedom was. They had no freaking idea.
Life is a cabaret, my friend.
Germans were so dysfunctional, and they had no concept of a real republic and doing new things and just doing things right. I mean, Germans were the perfect target for a demagogue. Germans were the perfect target, and there was nobody really
Apparently,
powerful.
Americans are too. What Neil Postman wrote in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, was about this condition of the American mind. That if you don't have a literate culture, the mind doesn't develop. And if the mind doesn't develop, you can't think and you can't develop judgment. And then you become subject to those images on the TV. And then there's a great big guy on there, orange man, and he's there and he's telling you what you want to hear.
Why didn't Elon Musk become president, or Peter Thiel become president, or Brad Pitt or George Clooney?
They were television star showmen. Trump became a showman.
So why isn't George Clooney or Brad Pitt the president of the United States now?
He didn't take the job. He didn't decide to.
Morgan Freeman. I mean, he played, I think, a U.S. president in a movie and did a great job at playing a president in the movie. I mean, there's something else going on here, because I mean, if the Republican Party is so old and so established, and they have all these professionals and they understand psychology, and yet somehow this guy appears who just all his life all about just casinos.
They got infiltrated by Russian agents and Chinese agents. But they got infiltrated. I can see it. It's quite clear to me that there's Russian and Chinese agents, not only in the Democratic Party, but in the Republican Party.
But
the difference is, I think, that the infiltration of the Democratic Party has been going on so long that some of these Democrats who were people who read books, like Bill Clinton, when they realized what the game was, that it was the Russians taking over everything, when Boris Yeltsin asked him in 1999, Bill, we still believe in you. We want one thing: give Europe to Russia. And Bill Clinton said no. Bill Clinton said no to Boris Yeltsin's demand to give Europe to Russia. In other words, he wouldn't pull out of NATO. That's what the Russians wanted in 99, and he didn't. And they brought Putin in to do it the hard way. And I'm afraid that Trump is now doing what Boris Yeltsin asked Bill Clinton to do in 99.
So he had to give up Europe.
It was just a matter of time before they got some dummy in the White, because these Democrats, however leftist and however much they compromised themselves in dealing with the Soviet Union and the Russians, they knew better than to go that far. They knew what was going to happen, even though they were bad. I admit they were all bad. Same thing with Scholz, same thing with Keir Starmer. They're all bad. But they, at least because they were in the left and they understood what was going on with this, the Russians in the left, they knew it was the fifth column because they were part of it. They knew they couldn't give it up to the Russians. They realized, oh no, wait a minute. I've done a lot of things for you people in Russia. It stops now. I'm not doing that. I can't do that for you. Trump is a guy who doesn't know any of that. He's a know-nothing. And so he thinks he can be this genius, that he can make the Europeans and the Japanese do everything and we still get to reap the benefit. And he doesn't realize he's just completely destroying, and then he can ally with Putin against Xi. It's childish. He's breaking all the toys. He's destroying the Western alliance. That's what he's doing, objectively.
Yeah, but I think that
he doesn't know that he's doing it. He's not smart enough to know.
As I said, there's such a long history post World War II. It's such a big history and all these structures, and some of it semi-secret or even fully secret. Ranging from military cooperation between Europe and the U.S., intelligence cooperation, all these relationships that were formed. Even family relationships and strategic groups and the Bilderberg Group and the Atlantic Bridge. There's so much stuff that was going on with very influential people. And they've seen, some of the older guys, they were around when Reagan was president, or even before that. So it's like this all still exists, and I don't think this Trump guy, who is on his last breath. I mean, he's very old. He's gonna retire in
Well,
I
he's
don't know,
got that
maybe a few
monkey as
years.
a vice president now.
Yeah, but still, I mean, I still
You saw
think
his
there are.
behavior, right?
I still think
He
there
was the
are.
real bad boy there on a week from yesterday, a week from Friday,
I still
week ago
think there
Friday.
are serious structures out there that have been there before Trump, and they will be there after Trump. And it's still that big question why these experience circles and the CNP and all that, why they decided to back Trump ultimately.
Hmm.
I don't know. I refuse to believe that America is America is weak on intelligence, and the communists are much better. I think the Americans are much better at intelligence than the Americans let on, and they do not want the target on their backs. I think they do not want anybody to see how good some of these structures really are. Because why put a target on your back? If you say, we're the CIA, here's our headquarters, these are the cars that are parked in the lot, we have oversight and everything's official. I mean, that puts a huge target on the CIA. Why put everything out in public? Why have an official budget? Why have official structures and official ways? It's like, I think the Anglos are much better at this spy game than they let on in public. I mean, it's still massively dangerous. The situation is massively dangerous, and let's just assume the Americans are much better than they seem to be. If we assume that, this strategy of little transparency and letting the clown show go on in public, I mean,
You have three defectors now from the former
even that would
Soviet
be
Union,
very
two
dangerous.
KGB and one GRU that say that Trump was recruited in 1978 as a spy as an agent, not an asset, but an agent of the Soviet Union back in 1978. Well, his first wife was
Yeah, but
from the communist bloc.
I mean, there's so many aspects of Trump's life, and so many people that said things like having been recruited, doing things.
Yeah, but isn't it starting to look? He's doing what they want.
Yeah, but why? I mean, come on. I mean, are the Americans, are the American elites too dumb to tie their shoelaces? Are they really retarded?
No, they're
can't
too
they
dumb
just see a risk when
they're
it's
pretty
staring
bad,
them in the face?
Alex.
I mean, a risk is
Look,
screaming in their
I
face.
trained in an American university. I know those people. They're all messed up in the head. We have radical stupidity on the left and now on the right. It used to be the right had some people that were rather sensible, but now it's on both sides. And I don't know how we survive. Moral idiocy is dangerous, very dangerous. And these are moral idiots. They don't know right from wrong, these people. I could tell by watching them now. I mean, I've thought that for a long time. I've said that before, that there's moral idiocy out there. No, it's much worse than I was saying. I was holding back on what I was feeling about it. But now I see this, it's like, no, I can't pretend anymore. I can't be optimistic anymore. I'm not optimistic. This is a disaster, and it's going to play out to be a disaster.
I said to people,
mark my words.
I said to people, vote Republican, but improve the party. Not just do the normal thing, get a close victory, and then just be stupid and make all these mistakes and never admit to a mistake and not have a mechanism for correction. I mean, I've been very clear about Trump for almost 10 years, or maybe it's 10 years by now. From the very first moment when this guy became an entity in politics, and when the craziness started, the MAGA cult started, I mean, I was calling this out at the moment it came into existence. And then year by year, during his presidency, I was trying to be objective. I was trying to be fair. But
I think we were fair.
always,
Alex, we on this show were bending over backwards to interpret Trump's moves as being helpful. But now I think the time is past now, right?
I never considered him to be the right person for the presidency. I always said, why couldn't they go with Ron DeSantis? Why couldn't they go with Nikki Haley? They should have picked somebody else. They should never have picked him in the first place. Why take the risk? Why
But
take the risk?
those people couldn't get any votes. Those people didn't get enough votes to win.
So, but it's like that was my position for a decade. Just find somebody else than Trump. Just stop with this influencer BS. Stop this cult nonsense. Don't give money to that. Don't share that stuff online. You have to be a part of political improvement. Improve the party, select better people, get the bad people out. This is very normal stuff, right? So I've been saying this for a decade. But when it came to the last election, I told people, vote for the Republican Party. Don't vote for Trump the savior or just Trump. Just vote Republican. But change.
Yeah, no, I never
party.
thought he was a savior either. No, we're in agreement on that. Anyway, it's time. We've used up our time now. I think we need to end the discussion. So, Alex, I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for being with us. I'm Jeff Nyquist. I'm in the United States. My co-host has been Alex Benesch in Germany, and we have been discussing the crisis in the West. Thanks for joining us.